Okay, so as you can see, the car is not here. The car is out getting the roll cage put in. So I had a feeling that this was going to happen, where I just won't really have too much content on the car itself. So what I figured I would do today is we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about bumpsteer, because I know a couple guys are asking about that on the 2G DSM. And I'm also going to talk about properly installing coilovers, because not a lot of people really get properly installing coilovers and what that all takes. So, without further ado, what bumpsteer is a change in toe angle going over bumps when the suspension is either drooping or going through bump. So what we're going to go over now, I have a little whiteboard set up here. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick little look at the theory and application of how bumpsteer and bumpsteer correctors work. I don't have any practical things to show you because I don't have a car here, but we'll go over this and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about as it relates to 2G DSMs specifically, because that's what I work on. Although the theory is pretty similar to different cars and different suspension setups, the way it's applied to different suspension setups clearly will be different. Okay, so 2G DSMs. You have your upper control arm, your lower control arm, and your tie rod. Your outer tie rod and inner tie rod steering linkage that turns the wheel when you turn the steering wheel. Now, if you know anything about cars, you'll know that suspension components are made of metal. They cannot stretch, they cannot contract. The only kind of play there is going to be in the bushings. If you have your factory rubber bushings, if you've gone to a spherical metal bushing or a Heim joint, that play has been eliminated. So you're really not going to have any kind of change in how anything works. So what we're going to talk about here is, because the suspension is made of solid components that cannot change their length, when suspension goes through its travel, all the components are going to work on an arc of from here to here is going to work on an arc like that, right? And same thing here, and same thing up here with the top ball joint. So now, because of this change, we're going to simplify that a little bit. Like this, going to your spindle. Now, because of it working on a swing like that, on a swing arc, when the suspension is compressed, the tie rod is going to be shorter relatively to where it is here. This is, obviously exaggerated, just to show the point. So you can see that if you draw a straight line through here and a straight line through here, it's not straight, but you can see that the 2 points, the arm under compression has effectively gotten shorter. Now, what does that mean? When an arm working on an arc such as this gets shorter, it will pull on whatever is able to get pulled on. In this case, the suspension in the corner. Let's put this back here. Because everything on this side of the car is chassis, and everything on this side of the car is suspension with pivoting points and points of rotation and all the other good stuff. When the suspension compresses or droops, it's very important to know that it does it under droop as well, because we always have to consider droop. So because it's shorter here, it's going to pull on the wheel. All right, it's going to pull the wheel in. Now, if we're looking from a top perspective, right here, 2G DSMs are what is referred to as a rear steer car, where the rack and pinion and the tie rod mounting points are on the back side of the spindle. They are behind the center point of the suspension. So like you have front steer cars like Mustangs and 94 Camaros, and stuff like that, where it's got the rack in front of the center line of the wheel, so that it's pulling on the front of the spindles, or front steer. Because a 2G DSM is rear steer, when the tie rod shortens, as we said here, under compression relatively, it's going to pull the backside of the wheel in, and that creates toe out. Now, why is that important? If you're in a corner, we'll say a right-hand corner, right? You have your steering wheel turned to the right. That's not really right, is it? Steering wheel is turned to the right. The wheel is turned in this way. This is out that way. If you get toe out under compression, if you're making a right-hand corner, your left wheel is going to be compressed because of load transfer. Now what's going to happen is, because of this pulling that in and giving you toe out, you're actually going to lose steering angle. It's going to steer the car not in the direction that you want it to go in. It's going to bump steer out. It's going to give you toe out under compression. Toe out on droop on the right-hand side of the car, if you're making a right-hand corner, is okay, because it's actually turning that wheel more. So you're going to lose steering angle on the outside wheel and gain steering angle on the inside wheel. Really, even though the inside wheel turning in more than you have put correction in is also not as desirable, at least it's bringing you closer to the corner and you can correct forward a little bit better. But when you have toe out in the corner, that's not good. If you have toe out on the outside tires, because now you're turning the wheel to the right a certain amount of degrees to get the corner, and now the left front wheel is toeing out, you're just losing that steering angle, which is not what you want. You want the steering angle to be predictable. You want the steering angle to be the same every time, and you want it to be as close to zero bump steer as possible. So this is where it gets difficult, because I don't have anything practical to show, but we'll do a little. This is the tie rod. If this is your spindle and that's the mount, then this is going to be your tie rod, say. And it's got to, like that. Adjusting this height is what is usually going to give you your bump steer correction. My car, when I checked the baseline bump steer with the stock tie rod, I had like 147 thousandths of toe out under full compression, which may not seem like a lot, but that's a lot more than zero. After, what I wound up doing was using Bobby's bump steer kit, I was actually able to get this number down to 7 thousandths, which is much better than 47 thousandths. So we're going to see how that's going to feel on the racetrack. So that's kind of like a basic overview, a very simplified version of bump steer and bump steer correctors. A lot of people will buy a bump steer correction kit for their car that doesn't really need any tuning, and that's not exactly how it works, because every car is different, everybody's ride height is different, everybody's spring rates and wheel sizes and everything, all tire sizes, tire sidewall, all that is different, and all that plays into how your suspension reacts and how your suspension works. So getting a one-size-fits-all bump steer where you don't need to put a bump steer gauge on it and measure what everything's doing as you're operating the suspension through its travel with no spring on the coilover, you're not really getting an idea of what it's really doing, and you're not really fixing anything. It's just something to buy to to say that it's gonna work, but you don't really know. I had put this kit in before without any kind of gauge. I was just like, all right, as long as the tie rod is flat, we should be okay. Wrong. I drove the car home from the alignment shop that day. It was like still when it was a street car. And I was holding the wheel straight, just driving down the street, and the front of the car was changing lanes. It was pulling me over WL lines, pulling me towards the curb, just going over undulations in the street. So this is something that is not, it should not be taken lightly. You should not just throw, a Summit Racing bumpsteer kit into your car without knowing what all the numbers are. You need to do it properly. You need to make sure, because it's very dangerous if it's not set up correctly. So again, that's a really quick version of what bumpsteer is on a 2G DSM and what it is on most cars. I had a better idea of how to do it, but the way my shop is set up now, I can't really record doing things without it being very difficult. I can't like put my camera down and like point it at the whiteboard. I don't think I can. This work? No. So yeah. Okay. Now we're gonna do coilovers. That's upside down. Okay. So here's my little diagram. So if you're adjusting the ride height of your vehicle with a coilover, it is very much imperative that you do not use this lower perch for ride height. What that lower perch is for making sure that your overall travel is correct. Bump and droop. And we'll go over that in a minute. So bump is obviously you're going over a bump, suspension's compressing. Droop is you're going over a bump. On the other side of the bump after the compression, maybe the road dips down a little bit and you're gonna have a little bit of droop. Or you're in a corner and the vehicle's load transferred to the side of the vehicle, right-hand corner. Vehicle's loaded to the left side of the vehicle, and everything on the right side is gonna be in droop for the most part. You're not gonna be at ride height. It's gonna be compressed on the left side and drooped on the right side. So now why is this important? If we adjust our ride height using this perch and we're screwing the coilover body into the lower perch, we are upsetting the ratio of where the piston is in the shock. If we're using this to raise the car, we're gonna run out of bump travel, where the suspension is gonna compress, this is gonna come down and smack into the bottom of the shock body inside, which is obviously no good. Now, if we're using it to lower the vehicle, we're gonna run out of droop travel, which is also not good, because you're gonna go into a corner, maybe you pick the wheel up, maybe you go over a bump, maybe you go over some curbing on the racetrack, and the suspension can't fully let the wheel hang to stay in contact with the track surface. So it is imperative that only these two top perches are used for your ride height adjustment. This lower perch is only for setting up your bump and droop travel. So now when I talk about bump and droop travel, what are we talking about? Here is the little bit of math you gotta do. So what you're gonna wind up doing is you're gonna take the coilover apart when you get it out of the box. You're gonna take the spring off, you're gonna take everything apart. You're gonna measure from the top of the shock body to usually, if you've ever taken a coilover or a shock or anything apart, there's usually a little clip, a little C-clip or something in the shock shaft up there that holds the shock top on. So what I usually do is I'll measure from here to that little clip. Use a caliper or whatever you gotta use. The caliper would be best because it's down to the thousandths. So then you write that number down. We'll say we got 4 inches. Okay. Now you're gonna compress that shock as much as you can, all the way. Compress it all the way till it's down. And then you're gonna measure again from the shock body to that C-clip and write that number down. We'll say it's, maybe a half an inch is left. That's a lot. It's probably gonna be a little less than that. All right? So if we take the 4 inches and subtract the 1/2 inch, our total damper travel is going to be 3.5 inches. Make sense? Because we're subtracting 4.5 inch. Okay. So that's going to be our total amount of travel. Now, what you're going to do, you're going to take your droop travel, which is the 3.5 inches. Did I say 4.5? I meant 3.5. So we're going to go 3.5 and divide that by 3. So we will take 3.5 divided by 3 is 1.166. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the total travel, subtract the droop travel, and that will give us our bump travel. All right? So now you may be asking, why are we dividing it by 3? Why are we dividing total travel by 3 to get the droop travel? A good rule of thumb is to have 1/3 of your travel devoted to droop. That's just a good place to start. It's not etched in stone. You may, after you start taking measurements and start looking at things, you might want to adjust that just to make sure that you're in the right ballpark for your car, for your suspension setup, for your spring rates and everything like that. So then what you're going to wind up doing is you're going to put the coilover back in the car without the spring on it. You're going to jack the wheel up to its ride height, to whatever your ride height's going to be, from your fender height to the either center of the wheel or someplace that you have marked down on the wheel or the hub. And you're going to adjust this length from this perch. You're going to adjust that length so that when the suspension is at ride height, you're going to have that 2.334 between here and the top of the shock without the bump stop. Make sure you don't put the bump stop in there. So then you can jack up and make sure that you have all that travel set right. Now what you're going to wind up doing is, after you have all these settings and numbers plotted and put into your car, into your suspension setup, you're going to put the bump stop back on, and you're going to start running the suspension up with the bump stop on. And you want to make sure, with the wheel hooked up, with the wheel bolted onto your hub, you want to make sure that you're engaging that bump stop before the wheel is contacting any bodywork, chassis, or anything like that. If it's not, if the wheel is smacking into the upper fender or something like that, you can make a little bit of an adjustment here to make sure that your wheel is not going to smash into your ground, into the car. So you can add some camber to clear whatever bodywork, or if there's some hard chassis part that it's going to run into, you can adjust this travel number a little bit, or your ride height. But as you can see, coming through here and adjusting, the real reason I wanted to do this video is so that people would stop adjusting their coilovers from this lower perch and this shock body adjustment, because you may be raising the vehicle, but you're throwing your travels way off, and you're going to either be smacking the piston into the bottom of your shock, or you're going to be smacking the piston into the top of the shock and you'll be hanging the wheel. There's a lot of different scenarios where this is just bad. Once this is set and your travels are squared away and you have the whole suspension set up the way you want, you should never touch this again. You shouldn't have to touch this again. All your corner balancing and ride height is going to be done from these perches right here. That's the main thing of what I'm trying to get across here, is that the shock body, the lower travel adjustment, once it's set, once you do all your math and you have everything set, you should just be able to do all your suspension settings, ride height, and corner balancing from these 2 perches, and that's it. So yeah, that's going to be it for today, for today's episode. Just because I don't have a car here, I'm going to do a video on rewiring the trailer, because the trailer's a disaster. This garage is a disaster, so it's going to have to get all revamped and cleaned up and organized again. It's like I started moving back in here after I got everything done in the garage, and I just kind of got to work on the car because I was running out of time. So now it's time to play catch up. We won't have the car here for a couple weeks, so it's gonna be play catch up time of getting the garage squared away, getting the trailer squared away for the season, so we can make sure that we can run, we can get to the racetrack without issues. So that's exactly what we're gonna do tomorrow. I got a buddy coming by and give me a hand with some things. I think we're gonna run electric and maybe work on the trailer a little bit. I'm not sure. So yeah, that's the plan. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully next episode we'll be working on the trailer. I'll try and detail the trailer work that we're doing and whatever else we got to do. So see you guys later.